the West Coast, the East Coast, and deep in the heart of Texas. It's the Geek at Arms podcast with Bryan, Mike, and James.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Geek at Arms podcast, a podcast camped squarely at the crossroads of geek culture and Christian faith. I'm James, and with me, as always, are my friends, Mike and Bryan. Mike, how are you, my man?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing, James?
I'm well. It's been a busy and stressful month.
Yep.
Supposedly, today is the last day that we should have triple-digit heat here in Texas.
Lies.
Everything about the weather is lies in Texas. You just get used to it and hope for the best. And by hope, I mean just pray that the power grid stays on. But other than that, fine. Getting through, surviving to the next month. How about you, Bryan?
I am feeling really great about feeling extremely okay right now, if that makes any sense.
You know, sometimes good enough is good enough.
Yes. If you had asked me this question last week, you'd have just been depressed by my answer. So doing pretty okay right now.
So that's solid improvement.
Yes, it is.
I really hope no one goes back to our last 60-something episodes and listens to our answers of how we're doing and puts them together in one long clip. Because if they
Big
do,
supercut of,
what's going to happen is that there's going to be a realization of these guys need some help. They
were really chipper the first few episodes.
Yeah.
And it just keeps kind of degrading over time.
Well,
downhill.
We're middle-aged men now. I mean, and the good news is that we're some of our friends who are still alive. So that's fantastic.
And we started the podcast only slightly less middle-aged, but that's okay.
And the good
Well,
news,
it is-
listeners, is that we do have good practice in that if we need help physically, we get it. If we need help mentally, we get it, because mental health professionals are a valuable part of life. So seek help if you do need it.
Mhm.
No.
And as for the weather, it's 74 degrees outside and 87 degrees inside my apartment. I don't understand how this works.
Do you want the short answer or the long answer?
I don't want any answer. I just want to complain about it.
Let's complain about it. It
Yep.
just stinks.
Sometimes
Yes, it does.
the catharsis of complaining cannot be ignored.
Yep.
We just got to let it out.
So complaints lodged. I'll expect an answer in the next 6 to 8 months from whoever handles those complaints.
And it will probably come during episode 73's recording.
Right.
Let's get to Geek Out. And I will kick things off this episode because I want to share with you guys a series of books that I have been enjoying immensely. Joy started reading them. I think they were recommended to her by her brother. Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman.
Sorry, I read it, but still hearing it. Go on, please.
So, how do I describe these books? It falls under that newer genre of lit RPG. Gosh, it's kind of part isekai, part apocalypse, part game show, part reality TV, with a healthy sprinkling of satire and a nice glazing of insanity.
Listeners, I don't even know what's going on here, but I'm so on board for it. Keep going.
Basically, without giving away too many spoilers, as the title suggests, there is a dungeon crawl. A dungeon crawl being participated in by a man named Carl. Now, this series, it doesn't hit the ground running. It gets kicked down the mountainside rolling, completely against its will. In the first few pages, the human race of Earth, to borrow a quote from a reviewer, our agency as a species is removed. The human race of Earth is turned into an endangered species. And our hero is thrust into this situation with the leftovers of humanity. Basically, aliens who have been observing the Earth forever wiped out most of the surface. The remnants are faced with a choice. Stay on the surface, and whatever happens, happens, or go through an entrance to the first level of a dungeon and fight for your life and possible freedom.
So I
And-
take it Carl decides that he's going to fight for his freedom.
Not only his, but his pet cats as well.
I mean, of course.
Of course, who becomes a much bigger character than you would think. But maybe not so unexpected, considering the cat's name is Princess Donut.
Okay, you can stop right there. I'm sold. That's what I'm gonna read once I'm done with my next two books.
Mike, it is so entertaining. It is the most bingeable book series that I have read in forever. The author, Matt Denneman, brings so many different elements, from like tabletop RPGs to first-person shooters, and he makes use of the dungeon dynamic brilliantly, because every time the character and the other quote-unquote players in this narrative go down to another level, it gives Matt the opportunity to create a whole new world with new rules or scenarios for the characters to navigate. And the bad guys, the enemies, or the mobs, as they're called in the book, they're a mixture of our history, of human culture, religion, pop culture, and the results, they're absurd, confusing, sometimes a little blasphemous, and frankly, sometimes very, very disturbing. I mean, on the first level, and this isn't even the most outlandish or fantastic creature he faces, he's faced with a pack of meth llamas.
Meth llamas?
Meth llamas. Llamas addicted to meth.
Yeah, so what's in the box is what's on the label. This isn't hard, Bryan.
Pretty much. Right now, there are 6 books out, with a 7th, I believe, slated for October. I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Now, traditionally, I will either read the book or listen to the audiobook. This time, though, I'm going to do both because I listened to an excerpt, and these books are brilliantly narrated by Jeff Hayes. The performance he gives elevates them to a whole new level. It is one of the best audiobook performances I have ever listened to. Like, if I had to rate like my favorite, his, I think, is going to be easily top 3.
The importance of a good narrator for audiobooks cannot be understated.
Well, he takes it beyond good. Like, if you get a good one, you're lucky. But you get someone like this, and you feel blessed. Mike, put it on your list. Bryan, I recommend you do so as well. And
It's already there.
Good. I look forward to discussing them with both of you in the future. For the second part of my Geek Out, I thought a lot about a game that Bryan mentioned in our last episode, PAX Dei. And I found that I was kind of in a mood for a game like that. And I'm really bummed that this isn't going to become the console anytime soon. But thankfully, PAX Dei isn't the first game in this genre. So after some research, I was able to find something that was fairly close on the PlayStation called Medieval Dynasty. Came out, just a few years ago. It's a first-person open-world medieval life simulator. It has a very light storyline, but there is one. And it's about survival, building a town, and not just a town, but also building a community of people. And it really focuses on the whole hunt, survive, build, and lead dynamic. So far, I'm only maybe about 6 to 8 hours in, and that's been long enough to get to know people in a town, build myself a single shack, wattle and daub, and kill one rabbit with a spear. And I'm not going to discuss how long it took me to do that. Like, video game person was able to do it after several minutes of real James would have had a heart attack about a quarter of the way through that. Or real James would have thrown the stick and broke the spear.
Yeah, the spear is not exactly the best weapon for hunting rabbits, I don't think.
No, but the rabbit snare that I was tasked with using was taking too long.
I imagine that an elephant gun is not well equipped for it either.
I guess it depends on the size of the rabbit.
I'm reminded of a Rifts game that we played, Bryan, where I decided I wanted to go hunting, and I used my laser pistol to shoot a deer. Now, the problem, Mike, you would think that, well, there is no problem. A laser gun would probably kill a deer, no problem. And you're right, it does kill a deer, no problem. But because in
If all you
Rifts,
block is with hooves and
yeah,
antlers.
in Rifts, a laser gun is classified as a mega damage weapon, which meant that when I scored a direct hit, as Bryan said, all that was left was the antlers and a hoof or two. While, not unappealing, it is rather crunchy and hard to get down.
I mean, options. I mean, the last time I saw somebody trying to take down a rabbit with a weapon, it was the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch. So I'm not one to consult.
Which really leads you to believe that rabbits are much more dangerous than we realize. But anyway, in this game, the rabbit snare was taking too long. So I look forward to getting several more hours in, seeing what I make. And I know my biggest problem isn't going to be resources and finding the right people with skills to join my little town. I know my biggest problem is going to be trying to get the design of my town just right, trying to get it laid out just perfectly, just so that it's economical and so that it was visually appealing and everything's spaced correctly. I can tell right now that's going to drive me up the wall.
James invents medieval zoning laws.
Ooh.
But my cottage in Pax Day was like coming out so perfectly, and I getting it all. And then I got up to the peak of the roof, and I realized that I was one tile off, and so the peak of the roof was like crossing the other side. And like, oh, that's infuriating.
Bryan takes one look at it. He's like, son of a, starting again.
Yeah, I was like, do I tear the whole thing down? I've got to undo all of my like crafting stations because they're all on the second floor.
Yes.
Terrible.
Gosh, we are too alike in this regard. After I built my first shack, after I got all the stone, the clay, and the sticks and the logs, and I build it, I take several steps back to look at it. I'm like, it's cockeyed. It's cockeyed facing the road. You know what? No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's not fine. It's fine. It's not fine. No, it's fine. James, you got stuff to do.
I think I just might have to download this game, make it cockeyed on purpose, and say, Kaja, look at my village, and then watch her eye twitch.
I didn't know she
That's
could
where the game
monitor
becomes
that
worth the
far
money.
through the window. So, that will wrap it up for me.
I guess I will go next. I have really been enjoying this anime called Frieren Beyond Journey's End. It is, and I say this as a good thing, this show is slow. And it's not slow like you're stuck in traffic. It's slow like being on a lazy river or going for a walk on a summer evening. It doesn't feel the need to get anywhere fast, partly because in some ways the show is a retrospective of the title character, Frieren. She's an elf that's lived thousands of years, and she was part of an adventuring party that took 10 years, and they overthrew the Demon King, whoever that was. And so 50 years later, she comes back and runs into meets her friend, and he dies. And then she reflects after his funeral. I really didn't know him. Like, I spent 10 years, and that was a good chunk of his life, but it was hardly any of mine. And in some ways she comes off as autism coded. I'm not sure if that's, how they planned it, but she doesn't always entirely understand human feelings and interactions because she's processing everything through this life of thousands of years. And so she's kind of reassembling a party and not exactly retracing her steps, but not exactly not retracing her steps of when she had been part of this defeating of the Demon King 50 years ago. And it's just a really interesting exploration of the relationship dynamics and exploring the mind of this individual who's just been around so long and her reflections on the relationships that she had back at the time that she's just kind of now unpacking. And so it's just a really beautiful show. And I highly recommend it, mostly for the engaging characters. Have either
Yeah,
of you seen it?
you recommended it to me several weeks ago, and so I think I'm about halfway through the season one. I don't know if there's more than one season, but yeah, I've been really enjoying it just as a kind of I like it late in the evening before I'm going to bed, just because it's not high energy, it's not actiony, but it's very engaging, and I have been enjoying the characters and just the slow unraveling of this 10-year adventure that we're seeing just through her memory.
Yeah.
I really like it. I'm glad you suggested it to me.
It's a very chill show.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the anime version of a cozy game, I think, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that I've been doing lately is Restoration Games put out a call for playtesters, because playtesting their games is super important to them, and I absolutely love their Unmatched games, and so I signed up to be a playtester. And if anybody enjoys playing this game, I think it's a fantastic way of just seeing a new dynamic of the game. They send you things that you can either play in a virtual environment, if you have a virtual tabletop, or you can print and play. And you basically play these characters that are in development. And since they're in development, you need to send your feedback, what went right, what went wrong, what you think your powerful cards are and your least powerful cards, and keep your mouth shut about it, and don't send any pictures on social media, and don't share any specific information about the game that you're playing. So it's, in some ways, it's here's a game that you love, here's a little bit of homework to go with it, which sounds like a bad thing, but when you have sort of a deadline motivated mind, when you can say, oh, can I play 3 games of this week? And you ask your family, can we commit to playing 3 games of this week? Then yay, you get a dedication of 3 games of your favorite game that week. And that's fantastic. And in absolutely, completely unrelated news, in completely unrelated to the NDAs that are related to playtesting, they are going to be having a Kickstarter in September. I am done with Kickstarter. I'm just over it. I will absolutely be backing this next Kickstarter that they have, because it is going to be the cooperative version of the game, like Tales to Amaze, which I very much enjoy, except it is themed in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So based on what they have revealed at Gen Con, it looks like all 4 turtles are playable characters. And it looks like Shredder is one of the villains, and another one of the villains that states on the box is Krang. So there are, if it follows the pattern of Tales to Amaze, there are scenarios that you get to play as the turtles against these villains. And it just seems like such a right fit for this battle game to have the turtles. So I'm really excited about that, and will absolutely be backing.
So who will be the first turtle you play as?
That is a great question. I do have to say,
there's no wrong answers.
Yeah. That just based on the surrounding lore, I have to say that Raphael is cool but rude, and Michelangelo is a party dude. So I find that attractive.
Understandable. But don't forget, the other 2 have excellent qualities as well. I mean, Leonardo does lead, and Donatello does machines.
Yes, indeed. That is, I have heard from external sources not related to restoration games that is in fact the case. Um, though related to that, I mean, I do think that it would be kind of fun since this is Unmatched. You can pull any of your characters and have it be compatible with the game. To team up Donatello and Nikolai Tesla, I think would thrill Donatello to the very core of his heart. So I think this is going to have to happen at some point.
Yeah, but does he actually contribute anything to the fight? Because he's just asking Tesla a lot of questions. Geeking out over that.
He raises a good point.
While Nikolai Tesla is just shocking the crud out of these guys with his Tesla coils. Like, you could just jump in the game here, Donnie, please.
So it's just lightning gun and a stick. Okay.
Yeah, but who knows? The game has not been released yet, so. Gosh, if I had a choice, if I was facing off against Shredder, would I choose a lightning gun or a stick? Yeah, I'm gonna go for a lightning gun. I have to have lightning gun.
Well, the man is covered in metal plates, so the lightning gun is a solid choice.
Yeah.
I don't care if this has any mechanical effect at all whatsoever. This is happening. But that's what I've got for my Geek Out.
Okay, well, I guess that tosses it to me. As I do many years, I recently went to SIGGRAPH, which is the big nerd convention for computer graphics and video game like technologies. Not the this is what's coming out soon kind of convention, but all of the people nerding out about these are the cool papers that we just wrote to describe how pressure is transmitted through a volume and then how you can put that in your CG computer graphics up on the screen. So I didn't actually get to see a lot of cool new stuff because I was there for work and I had to meet with customers a lot. But I did get a chance to walk around through the emerging technologies room, which I always love, and the art gallery. And they had this thing in the art gallery where it was this robot with a kind of a spherical head with just one big eye, a camera in it. And it kind of look around and you sit in a chair and you put on these headphones and the robot talks to you. It doesn't have a conversation with you. It's just like somebody took all the filtering off of ChatGPT and it just gives you this robotic stream of consciousness while it stares at you.
Wow. So this is kind of an uncomfortable ASMR bot.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. It's like, imagine if, do you remember Flight of the Navigator, Max, the robot?
Wow.
Oh my.
Great callback.
Yeah, Max in Call of Cthulhu. So the robot looks at me and says, if the mirror could lie to you, what would it whisper in your ear? It's like, okay, I have to take these headphones off now and go away.
To which the robot responded, "You'll be back, Bryan."
I almost did go back, but I ran out of time.
When the revolution comes, which side do you think I'll be on, Bryan?
It never said anything as coherent as that. It was just really weird, bizarre, like, who's the author that I'm thinking of? James Joyce kind of style. Is very, very strange. But so SIGGRAPH was fun. Saw a lot of cool stuff. I've mentioned Call of Cthulhu, so I guess I should move on to what we've been doing in the regular RPG. We've been playing Call of Cthulhu. My character Eldon he's been body swapped into the body of a cultist, pretty much going insane. And his last move was to try to persuade the police that he was a secret agent. And he's just cracked enough that as he's trying to persuade them, he's actually persuading himself.
Oh, no.
So now I'm playing a character in the body of another character, pretending to be a third character. And Bryan himself is kind of going nuts doing this. It's a lot of fun. And I'm really hoping that he survives long enough to just figure out what kind of wackiness he's going to do next. But I really think that the other players should stop letting me make decisions. Because I keep digging us deeper and deeper into this terrible hole, and they're all going to suffer for it, but nobody else speaks up. They have only themselves to blame.
I think that "don't let me make decisions" was the theme of my character when you and I were playing James and Kaja was GMing, and I had that insane droid.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, I keep failing all these sanity rolls, and Eldon just keeps spiraling deeper and deeper into madness, and yet everybody else is just content to let him be the leader. This is a really bad idea, guys.
I feel like that is a real commentary on American politics on the whole.
At the end of one of the sessions, the GM said, "Thanks for doing all those murders."
Which is something you will hear in a Call of Cthulhu game. Not so much My Little Pony, My Friendship is Magic RPG.
I don't know. You've never seen the way I play it.
No, but also in civil politics, possibly. Anyway.
And somewhat related to that, I've been binging the Glass Cannon podcast, which, if you're not familiar, is a network of RPG actual play podcasts. And I got hooked on their Call of Cthulhu game, A Time for Chaos, which I think they just wrapped up their season 2, and season 3 should be coming out in a couple of months. And I'm currently in the midst of Delta Green, which is Call of Cthulhu with super spies. And they're just so entertaining. Fair warning, the language is very rough. They are quite potty mouths, but they're such great role players and so agile in the way they think, quick on their feet. It's really, really a delight to listen to. And I think that wraps it up for me.
Then let's head to the next movie in our Great Adaptations Film Club. Now, this is a movie that I have been hoping that one day we would get to, that we would have a reason to watch it for our film club. And that day is now.
Yeah, the real roadblock was pushing it past Bryan, because that guy...
I was surprised when he said yes. I mean,
it was a tough sell.
Mm-hmm.
When we, somebody, I don't remember who it was that suggested the Great Adaptations as a film club, I couldn't come up with an answer. It's like, I can't really think of something that's a great adaptation of a novel, because I have this block in my brain that whenever I'm asked for my favorite of anything, I always just discount Lord of the Rings, because if I don't, it's always the answer. So it's like just this block in my head, and I can't think of a movie that was a great adaptation of a book until somebody said, "Well, what about Fellowship of the Ring?" I'm like, oh, of course. But
of course, that's the right answer.
Bryan's kind of like that kid that's in that joke of the Sunday school teacher holding up a picture of a squirrel, and they say, "What is this?" And Bryan's like, "Well, it looks like a squirrel, but I know that the answer is Fellowship of the Ring."
Right. So you guys picked for me this movie because it's the best movie based on the best book. Well, second best book maybe, because I do like The Two Towers slightly more than Fellowship in the book form.
Oh, now we're gonna have fighting words.
Well, but as a movie, Fellowship was the best of the trilogy.
I'm biased because I tend to like the first in trilogies the best anyway, so this was a pretty easy matchup for me.
So I had never actually read the trilogy up until I was standing next to Bryan. We were at his computer. He pulled up the very first teaser for the Fellowship of the Ring. This was like in, I don't know, the year 2000.
I think it must have been 99, because they started advertising and putting stuff out pretty early for this one.
You're probably
right.
right.
I was just hoovering it up. I had collecting every scrap of information I could find.
Because all I remember was it was a picture of the ring rotating in the air, like someone had, flicked it like a coin. And then up went the title, Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. And I thought, well, I better get to it. I got to read the books first before I watch the movies. So I went and I bought a paperback copy of Fellowship. Over the next 2 weeks, I devoured all 3 books. And I was starting my second read through.
Oh, wow.
So when Fellowship did come out, I can confidently say that I have seen that movie in theater more than any other movie in my life by far. I mean, thank goodness this was early 2000s movie pricing, because I dropped a ton of cash going to see this movie. At one point, I was keeping my ticket stubs just so I could keep a count. I think I stopped at 9 or 10.
So you realize this isn't like the coffee shop where if you get 15, then the next one's free. Like they still charge you full price.
Didn't care at all. I just going through my week and wondering, what am I going to do tonight? I go see Fellowship again. I'll do that.
See, I had not even read The Hobbit until I was in seminary, and Kaja had given it to me as a gift. And then The Fellowship of the Ring is coming out the next year. And so I'm like, well, I'm in the process of planning a wedding and I'm finishing my semester at seminary, but I got to at least start this thing before I go see it. And so I hadn't actually even finished the book when I had seen it. But I've read it and watched it so many times since then, because it's fantastic cinema and it's fantastic reading. So I guess there's the question of what kind of adaptation is this? I mean, we've talked about So Close that it's a pop-up version, and So Far that it's barely inspiration. What kind of adaptation is Fellowship of the Ring of Fellowship of the Ring?
I think it occupies that ideal spot in the middle of the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not slavishly devoted to the novel, but it also doesn't take its liberties lightly. I mean, every change that they made is very well motivated for what's going to make the film work out in its own medium, but also appeal to the audience it's trying to capture. And the cast talked about, they're on the set and there are dozens of copies of the novel scattered around the film set. And, Jonathan Rhys-Davies is coming up to Orlando Bloom with a passage from the book. He said, here, read this section right here. This will be good for your dialogue. So they're constantly referring to the book and using it it's infused in the movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because they do make changes. And Christopher Tolkien has allegedly said with some dismay that Peter Jackson took his father's sweeping fantasy epic and turned it into an action movie for teenagers. And in some ways, he's not wrong in that respect. I mean, Peter Jackson did make distinct tone changes when he's presenting a book steeped in philology and myth, and then trying to make it make sense in a digestible form in this other medium on screen.
Let's face it, if it had stuck to the movie as much as possible, the entire 3.5 hours would have just been getting out of the Shire.
Months, in fact.
The second movie would not have been the Two Towers. It would have been Tom Bombadil and the Barrow Downs.
Wow, that would be a wild thing to try to capture on film.
The entirety of the third movie would be the Council of Elrond.
I would watch that film.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah, Christopher Tolkien is maybe a little over proprietary of his father's work.
A little, I say jokingly.
Yeah, and I don't begrudge him that. I mean, his acts of preservation and the continued publication of his father's notes is just, it's fantastic. I love that he's done that.
Same.
But I think he kind of misses the mark when it comes to the professor's goal of creating a mythology, because mythology is not immutable. An action movie for teenagers. Did he ever see? Now my brain is blank.
Bakshi?
Well, Bakshi. Yeah. No, I'm thinking of any of the movies based on Greek myth. I mean, it's like they're not
Clash of the Titans.
Clash of the Titans. That's the one I was thinking of. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's mythology brought to the screen, and I think that Jackson did a much better job with Fellowship of the Ring than anybody has ever done with a Greek myth.
Let's be real. There is never going to be an adaptation of these books which would have fully satisfied either Christopher or his beloved father. But what Peter Jackson did with these films is that he gave us a set of them that are accessible to both newcomers and diehard fans alike. And it helped that he And the vast majority of the people making this film loved this material so much.
Yeah.
I mean, this was such a work of love and passion by all of them.
Right.
And I think if Christopher could take a step back, like you said, Bryan, thank goodness for all that he has done to preserve his father's works and his intellectual property and his good name. But I think that if he would just kind of like I said, take a step back, he would see these movies for what they are and a loving homage to his dad's work.
And I think that one thing that is different about Fellowship of the Ring than some of the other adaptations is exactly how steeped Fellowship is in the source material. And we do have Tolkien's words regarding a work in progress version that was being adapted by Morton Zimmerman. And after he had read a story treatment, he had the following to say about the work in progress. This document, the story treatment, as it stands, is sufficient enough to give me grave anxiety about the actual dialogue that will be used. Zimmerman is quite incapable of excerpting or adapting the spoken words of the book. He is hasty, insensitive, and impertinent. He does not read books. It seems to me evident that he has skimmed through The Lord of the Rings at a great pace and then constructed his storyline partly from confused memories with the minimum references back to the original. And by contrast, Peter Jackson uses the actual text from The Lord of the Rings as much as humanly possible. He makes changes, but wherever possible, he places Tolkien's words in the dialogue. Now, he may change who says them, but this script is steeped in the original.
Yeah, and there were a couple of times I listened. My second viewing of the movie was the audio commentary on the extended edition by the production crew, and I think it was one of the editors who said that they'd made some changes in the structure, and the more they were cutting and the more they were working on it, the more it just kept pulling itself back to the original structure of the novel. They tried and failed to make it different.
Well, good. So, in the end, Ronald isn't here, Christopher isn't here, Zimmerman isn't here. So between the three of us, what makes this a film that we feel comfortable calling a great adaptation? And while this is subjective for me, this film feels like Middle-earth, which is a big chunk. Like, a lot of the characters are different. The central story is there, and the characters are grounded and relatable. It's well-paced and more engaging than any other 3+ hour film that I can think of. And I feel like what The Fellowship of the Ring presents at its essence really is the book Fellowship of the Ring.
For me, it's that this movie gets so many things right. From all the care that was taken to building these beautiful sets and locations, and all the care that was taken in including the minutest details, some of which we don't get to see because Jackson would want so much detail, so much set dressing, and then loved close-up shots of a character's face. But the characters themselves, it's not so much that they are believable. From the beginning, these are the characters. From the moment that Frodo runs up to a cart with an old man in a tall hat and says, "You're late. A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. He always arrives precisely when he means to." That's not Ian McKellen and Elijah Wood. That was Frodo and Gandalf.
Yeah.
And every character they introduced conveyed the reality of that character in the same way. I think my favorite character introduction is still, we'll get to him later, but Strider. The scene at the Prancing Pony, so good. So good. But in addition to the characters, I thought a fairly decent adaptation of so many of the lines from the book. I can't express how much I loved the music of this movie.
Oh, geez, yes.
And not just this movie. I mean, I will say this. I love the score for The Two Towers more. because the song that they use for the Rohirrim is one of my favorite in existence. You talk about creating songs which fit the individual scenes so perfectly, which are tailored for them. This movie is a hallmark to that. And every piece of music fits so well. It was another piece of the puzzle that had to come together to make these movies work at the level that they did. Let's remember, this was a series of books which had always been considered to be unfilmable. There's never going to be an adaptation. It's too big. It's too much. And he did it. Peter Jackson, Weta, New Line Cinema, all of them, they did it. And they did it because they didn't come at it with half measures.
Yeah.
They went all in. They realized we can't just do this, see how it does, and hope we can make the next one. No. He realized that this wasn't 3 books. This was 3 chapters in a single story. And that's what he shot. They signed on all the actors for that. They went into it with that mindset. We're here for the long haul. We're going to tell this whole story right here, right now. And they did something new. And I think it's one of the finest pieces of cinema there is. Mm-hmm. It's an example of how to do an adaptation right.
Well, for my part, what makes it great is the sheer mastery of film craft. I don't think that Spielberg, I don't think that Truffaut could have done this better. Pick your directors and producers. I don't think anybody could have accomplished Fellowship of the Ring as well as Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh and their crew did. It is just, I have a couple of quibbles and we'll get to those in due time. But in terms of just mastery of film craft, I don't think that anybody has done it better. We'll see if I feel like if anybody will do it better. I don't know. But the sheer love of the source material, I think, really comes through that this wasn't a film being made because someone saw property that they wanted to profit from. I've been seeing a lot pop up in my newsfeed about what people were paid for the trilogy.
Not a lot.
Not a lot. Orlando Bloom made $175,000 for all 3 films.
Wow.
14 months of actual filming. I don't know how long they were on site prior to that. It's typically 2 months or so for training and rehearsals and all of that. So you're talking 16 months at least of work in a foreign country, where they're working 12, 16-hour days for $175,000 for all of that. And granted, they're all getting royalties, but not a lot.
Yeah, because these films don't make any money.
Though in Orlando's case, I do want to point out, he was like fresh out of film school. This was his first gig.
Thing. But even like Elijah Wood didn't make much more, and he had already been in films before.
True.
I think the highest paid person in the trilogy was actually Liv Tyler, because she actually this is somebody who's actually going to draw people into the theater just to see her. But it's a small part, and she got way more money than most of the rest of the cast did. But they didn't do it because they're like, oh, we're going to get rich from this. Even, the producers, it's like, this is going to cost us a lot to make this movie. We hope that it's going to make money because we hope that the fans are going to love it as much as we do. But they made it for the love of the craft. Yeah. They made it for the love of the books. Mm-hmm. And that really shows through in everything that they did, how much care they took. Shines right through it. You can tell this is not in any way a money grab. There's no cynicism in the making of this movie.
No.
All right. So do we want to talk about filmcraft?
Yes, we should.
Try and stop me.
That's because Bryan's everything he said flows right into it. But a quick word before we dive into filmcraft. I think we know more about the making of these movies than any other film in history. All thanks to the dozens of wonderful little documentaries that we got when we bought the extended editions of these movies in multiple DVDs and Blu-rays.
And they all come with 3 different full-length commentary tracks.
Yeah.
This film came out at just the right time when online marketing had its own very niche presence, and also DVDs were a thing, and DVD extras were what sold DVDs. So I think that we have the timing of that to thank for exactly how much we know about about what we do about behind the scenes of this film. And let me tell you, I adore behind the scenes when it comes to film.
Especially one like this.
I mean, right?
But wait, how did they make Elijah so small? And but Ian McKellen, he's huge.
Well, I guess that leads into our discussion of specifics. The thing that I remember most about the production notes and all the behind the scenes stuff was the way they use the forced perspective photography. And I know Mike says he promised not to say this, but I really wish he would.
Okay. Since we're talking about forced perspective, it's actually why they filmed in New Zealand. New Zealand was kind of a unique location because they had fewer perspective protection laws, and so Jackson could force all of the perspectives during filming, and it really is a tragedy. The union laws would never have allowed that to happen.
Yeah, but it saved so much money.
Yeah.
With the technique of forced perspective, define the terms really quick, is that you're putting things that are supposed to appear to be smaller further back, but then pretending that they're in the same distance away from the camera as the things that are larger. So you've got Elijah Wood standing 3 times further away from the camera than Ian McKellen, and it just makes him look like he's a smaller person because he's standing there, and back there by him are larger props, and they make sure that their depth of field is nice and deep, so everything is in focus. And they've been doing this for ages. Whenever you have a miniature you put in the front, the extreme foreground, and you shoot past it to the person in the background, so it looks like the iguana is 20 feet long, as they did in the early Harryhausen stuff. But some of the things that they did for this one was they kind of elevated it a little further beyond, because when you're doing that normally, you can't move the camera because your parallax differences will give it away. If the camera moves laterally, the foreground moves further than the background does, and suddenly everything pulls apart. But what they did was they put the people on the background on these little carts, or people in the foreground, depending on how they were doing it, that was linked to the camera. So as the camera moved right, the cart moved left, and it kept everything linked up from the perspective of the camera. So for the first time, they could get moving cameras in these forced perspective shots, and it looks brilliant.
They did a lot of meticulous math and meticulous design to get that to work. And I mean, honestly, some of it is the math, but also the presence and performance of the individuals they have in the shots. They are very, very careful about where they look when they're talking to this person that they can't possibly see because they're in different depths of field. And also when they're doing the editing, when you have a taller person speaking to a shorter person, the shorter person is filmed with the camera looking down at them, despite the fact that these people are approximately the same height. And they're able to do that enough, especially early on, but also they continue doing it just enough to remind you of the height differences, even when those height differences aren't seen. And there are a lot of little subtleties that really help sell this and sell it so well. I mean, it just looks so good.
Yeah, they really lean on it hard in the first third of the film to sell the audience on what's happening, that there really is a scale difference between these people. And then as it goes on, they do it deliberately less, but you're so ingrained in your brain so much that Frodo is really a smaller person than Gandalf or Aragorn, that you just believe it all the time. The thing that seriously impresses me was the level of detail in all of the props and sets, because they had to build Bag End twice.
Yeah.
And once scaled for Gandalf, so it looks really small, and once scaled for Bilbo, so it looks normal sized. But that meant that they had to make every single prop twice.
Yeah.
Exactly the same, just smaller. And there are hundreds, maybe thousands of props in Bag End. It's cluttered. This guy's been living here for 11 years.
And when you first see Bag End, when Gandalf walks in, it looks that way.
Uh-huh.
There's just paper stuff is strewn about everywhere, a bit of food over there. There's black carbon buildup from the fireplace from unknown amounts of fires. This isn't a set. This is real. Someone actually lives here.
One of the things that set designers have a hard time with is making a mess. And these people did clutter and age so well. I think that the only place I've ever seen it better is Everything Everywhere All at Once. I mean, this was just phenomenal.
So actually, to get that level, they just had Ian Holmes stay there for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, they wouldn't let him leave.
Yeah.
It's really kind of sad.
Actually, Ian Holm didn't ever actually visit Hobbiton itself. At least he never filmed in Hobbiton itself.
Interesting. It was all on soundstage for them.
Yeah, the interior bag end was on a soundstage. The party was on a soundstage.
Because there's one shot of him and Gandalf sitting on his bench in his front garden, blowing smoke rings and smoke ships. I always thought that was okay. I didn't know that was on a stage.
Yeah, apparently he never actually filmed anything in the Hobbiton location.
Oh, that's fascinating. All right. I'm kind of afraid to ask because I don't know how much storage space we have for this audio file, but shall we talk about the visual effects?
Buckle up, everyone. Make sure you have your favorite drink and something to eat.
Well, the movie is more than 20 years old, 23 years old now. And although some of the effects do look dated, there's no getting around that. The troll doesn't look great. They're still composited as skillfully, for the most part, as anything I've seen since, and really better than most. I watched the Battle of the Morannon Gate recently from Return of the King, and it's like, wow, that compositing is really not great. Fellowship was way better than this one. They were done like almost at the same time, but it's like there are a couple of comps that don't work for me. Like when Aragorn and Frodo are on those Star Wars steps, the ones that have no railings and they're over the virtually bottomless pit. And that one, the comp, it looked a little compy, just a little cutouts. And Gandalf flying up toward the camera during his fight with Saruman, because you wouldn't be able to get that shot if it was being all practical. So there was a little of a break in my suspension of disbelief there. And then one underground, Saruman, when all the Crebain are coming and reporting that they've seen the Fellowship, and he turns toward the camera and walks away, and there's this practical set piece behind him. So you've got Christopher Lee on blue screen, and then the miniature composited in behind him. And their depth of field on the blue screen shot was too shallow, so the practical set pieces were all blurred out, but then the miniature set piece behind him is still sharp in focus. So it's like, okay, that one doesn't work. But the fact that I can only pull out maybe 3 or 4 bad composites
from an effects heavy 20-year-old film.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty impressive.
It's interesting. The Balrog was a pretty big milestone for its time. Like fire simulations these days. Wait a minute, this isn't mine.
I think those are my words.
Like I was thinking about the Balrog, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like, yeah. I think I know I wanted to talk about the fire dynamics, but no, I'm looking at it like, no, these are absolutely Bryan. Bryan? What? Why don't I really like the shot with the Balrog? Why don't you tell me about the Balrog, Bryan?
So these days, if you're doing fire simulations, you're using what's called a volumetric simulation, where you divide your space up into this cubic 3-dimensional grid, and you've got information in each cell, and you say, okay, well, we know the pressure and the temperature in this cell and what it's going to do to why that's going to emit light, what kind of density of smoke we're going to have. And then we analyze that and we find out how it's going to affect the cells next to it, so the fire can move from one cell to another. And this is extremely computationally heavy. And back in 2001, it didn't look great.
Oh yeah, go watch The Relic. Like, don't, but go watch The Relic.
So they're like, okay, so we've got these fluid dynamics things. We try it, and it's like, it just doesn't look great. So they fell back on some older technology using particles, which is just we throw a bunch of points in there and we give them some forces that are blowing them this way and that. And we've got some gravity and we've got some lift and so forth. And the particles do their thing. And that generally doesn't look very well because it looks like just a lot of points. And you can kind of get smoke that way, but fire doesn't look great. So what they did was they shot actual fire, but because they knew they needed to attach it to the Balrog and needed to be following this creature's motion, they put each of these fire elements that they filmed on a card and attached the card to the particles. So you get the motion being driven by the particles, but you get that look of fire responding to pressure and heat and so forth from the actual filmed fire. So that's why it looks really photographic, because it is. But it also looks like it's coming off the Balrog because it's being driven by this particle simulation with the cards. And this is the same kind of thing that people are doing today in video games. If you see fire or smoke or something in a video game, a lot of times it's animated textures on cards attached to particles. But you have a much lower budget for textures in a video game, which is why it doesn't look as great as the Balrog.
I mean, really, the Balrog is such a great scene that it looked phenomenal when it first came out, and it still, I mean, generally looks good today.
Yeah, it's got a couple of problems with, they did a really great job of giving the Balrog weight and presence in the scene, but there's still, it doesn't quite look as heavy as it should have. And I had a little problem with the physics of that whip coming out at the very last instant, because I'm like, if he's falling as fast as it looks like and the whip is a certain length, it does not reach Gandalf.
No. Do you know how it reached Gandalf? Magic. That's it. I like it.
I was going to say plot.
Yeah.
I mean, the book really had this as a, Gandalf is screaming at them to run while he's falling. And I think that what they were trying to do was find some way to have that character moment where you just see the look on his face and then just have that silence.
Yeah, you have to have the close-up.
And so they cheated, and I think that, it's okay to cheat.
I'm fully willing to forgive the slightly wrong physicality of it just because you get to see Gandalf's face in that close-up.
I had not read up to that point in the book when I saw that in the film. And my heart just dropped.
I can remember being in theater when that scene came. You think he's about to pull himself up, but he doesn't. The shot goes to Frodo, and then it goes back to Gandalf, and he goes, "Fly, you fools." And he drops.
The scream.
Everyone's collective stomach in the theater also dropped. There was like this gasp that rolled across every single row. This was not what people were expecting.
Yeah, he's a main character, so he feels safe. What was actually pretty amazing is that my youngest had not had any contact with the movies when I was reading The Fellowship of the Ring to her as a teenager. And so she didn't know it was coming. And oh man, was she mad at Tolkien for like months.
So when I let my daughter watch these movies and we got to that scene, I mean, I look over and she's on the edge of her seat. She's got her hands clenched in front of her. And when he dropped, she let out this sound that I can't even begin to imitate. And I had to pause it because she just started peppering me. Is he gone? Is he dead? Is he really dead? Daddy, is he dead? Daddy, does he come back? Is he dead? I'm like, okay, I hear what you're saying. I want you to listen. I'm not going to tell you.
This is a movie.
Yeah. It's like, no, okay, I get it, but is he dead? And I'm like, just wait. All I'm going to say is wait. I'm still trying to sell to her the concept of letting the story play out.
Yeah. And this is why our children are in therapy. They have trust issues. Parents are not reliable. This is just the way it is. And I think with all of this, I I know that we're still in the technical, still it is these human moments, these reactions and character reactions that very much sell this film over and over and over again. Like, these characters are grounding. They are reacting like, that nobody brought anything by half measure.
No, I think one of my favorite reactions
It comes in pints?
that one, yes, comes from the Council of Elrond. Everyone's yelling and
Gandalf's
is angry.
face.
Well, Frodo keeps looking at the ring and he sees everyone's reflection, which, by the way, cool camera shot or cool effects shot, because putting people's reflection on the ring and then seeing, I don't think we needed the fire. I mean, it looked cool and I get what it was trying to convey, but anyway. And then finally he stands up and says, I will take, and you only hear his voice, like it's partially muted, like he really is trying to yell over everyone else's loud voices. And then Gandalf's the first one to hear it, and that face of sorrowful acceptance. Like, he knew Frodo was going to say it, but he hoped that he wouldn't. And he did.
You can see the end of Return of the King on his face in that moment.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You can see the full weight of him knowing that Frodo's going to wind up on the slopes of Mount Doom dying.
He sees the road ahead and knows how much Frodo is going to have to endure because of that statement. It's a touching moment, and it's a beautiful close-up, and not something that you would expect to see in a large, epic special effects laden movie like this. But that kind of leads me to another point I want to talk about, which is the close-up moments and the camera work. If we were done with VFX, if you had more, go ahead.
Not quite. I wanted to say one thing directly to that this movie understands, Peter Jackson understood during this movie that is what the effects were for, was to support those moments. It's not an effects movie. It's a movie it's got a lot of effects in it, but all of the technicals, all of the work that they're doing is to support those moments of seeing that realization on Gandalf's face, of seeing Frodo suffering, of seeing Sam loving his best friend.
Yeah, which is funny because it came after a moment that kind of took me out of the movie for a moment, because one of the only times that the dated effects stood out for me was when Frodo stood up, and you see he's not quite textured the same as everything else in the council.
Yeah, because he was on blue screen.
Yes. But then again, that's what happens when I watch the movie on a 4K TV.
The only one that really pulls me out, and this is the one point of the entire movie that I think makes it a less than perfect movie, is Galadriel's temptation.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
The effect that they put on her was just so bad, over the top. It's like Gandalf's anger when he shouts at Bilbo was subtle and menacing and wonderful.
Like wizards.
Cate Blanchett is a wonderful actress. Let her carry the scene. You don't need to. It looked like a bad After Effects effect.
Well, the computers were rendering a different scene, so we had to do all of this on a PlayStation 2.
Right.
I would love to have seen what they captured on set. Because, I mean, Cate Blanchett is already amazing. Yeah, that took me out of it in the moment. I thought it was overdone on my first viewing of the film.
Yeah.
This is another one of those moments where casting absolutely nailed it with Cate Blanchett. Yeah. And I'm just going to say, Rings of Power, you should have taken note of that. Moving on.
Right. You wanted to talk about camera work.
Yes, I do want to talk about camera work. There were so many times I felt like I was watching the biggest, most expensive art film in existence.
I'm now Googling biggest, most expensive art film in existence.
Peter Jackson took
in a lot of ways it kind of was.
Yes. Peter Jackson took so much care and attention to so many different shots and scenes, giving them a unique look and perspective. Like Gandalf looking through the chandelier when he's leaving Frodo and Bag End. Another one of my favorite is right after Bilbo leaves and he drops the ring from his hand and it makes that bass sound as it hits which I found out the way that they did that was the ring was like made of lead or iron or something, and they just put a magnet underneath the tile. so that it wouldn't bounce. But after Bilbo leaves, Gandalf walks back in, but you see him from the perspective of the ring.
Mm-hmm.
There's also later when, after Gandalf leaves and comes back, there's a very eerie moment in Bag End where the door is open, everything is in shadow, and the wind is blowing some of the papers about.
And apparently Gandalf opened all the windows so that the papers would be blowing around.
Well, let's
He's not a
face
great
it,
house guest.
Gandalf, if anything else can be said about Gandalf, he's a bit extra at times. But you see this hand reach out from the darkness and grab onto Frodo. Is it secret? Is it safe? And that reminds you, Peter Jackson's got a bit of a history with horror and with suspense. Previously, he did a film called Heavenly Creatures, which was a suspense psychological thriller. And then, of course, there was the very unique film, The Frighteners, with Michael J. Fox. And it was kind of a horror comedy, but still, he knows what he's doing. He knows how to use those elements. Also, the entire scene of Gandalf versus Saruman, the battle in Moria, countless moments where so much care was taken to make this look unique, to make it look just so. Well, they had the time to. I think they had the time to make those shots because you didn't see hardly any of those in Two Towers for the Return of the King. But by that time, things were moving along. They were under the constraints of the story. They had to get a move on. And with the building of the story and the lore, he made some really cool choices.
Yeah,
I just really enjoyed them.
Those two scenes in particular, the one with Gandalf coming back to Bag End, that was a place where Jackson had rearranged the sequence a little bit because he wanted to have the Nazgul, present in your mind, and then cutting to Frodo in this spooky scene in Bag End so that you think, oh gosh, the Nine Riders are there already and they're going to grab Frodo.
Mm-hmm.
And then the standoff between Gandalf and Saruman happens entirely
off camera
in the book.
Yeah.
If that's a good way to say it. But we needed to see it in terms of the movie so that we understand, because just getting it as an exposition dump, when Gandalf is in Rivendell would have been very unsatisfying.
I was delayed. A final point I want to make, which drove home the feeling of authenticity, was that you actually see people eating and drinking. Hollywood is notorious for having someone have a full plate of food in front of them and never eating it, or constantly picking up a cup and putting it back down.
It's because if the hobbits didn't eat things, no one would buy that they're hobbits.
The most unfaithful adaptation in history. But not just the hobbits and the Green Dragon, it comes in pints and everything else. I don't know why I loved it so much, but when we get the scene of Gandalf in Gondor researching the notes of Isildur, he's moving papers about. He's in a big room filled with nothing but scrolls and dusty books. And you see him halfway reading one, moving it over while taking a drink. And that just felt so real to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Part of this was because the crew being drawn from, the local New Zealand, not Hollywood, they didn't already know the downfalls of having people actually doing their own eating on camera. They were green. They didn't know any better, but it worked out brilliantly, and it's a great thing. But the reason they don't do it in Hollywood is because they're used to doing, 14 takes, and if everybody's actually eating in all 14 of those takes, they're going to get sick.
See, I also thought that maybe, look, we've got 10 hours to fit in 14 hours of filming. So we're going to be eating as we film. So we're going to be eating a lunch scene. The craft table has made period appropriate looking sandwiches and ales. Actually, no ales. No ales for John Rhys Davies. You get water this time, sir. Don't look at me side-eyed. You know what happened last time.
Ian, you're eating at your desk, and by the way, the camera's going to be running.
Another thing I wanted to take just a real quick look at in the film craft is the props, because these things are so lovingly made, and it doesn't matter which props. I could probably like James, you and I need to make a promise to each other that we won't go on about the arms and armor, because that's a whole different episode. Okay,
Mike,
so if I say they're good,
Mike,
oh,
I promise nothing.
dang it. All right.
I have the book, The Weapons and Armor of Middle Earth,
Why
that
am I not
was
surprised?
made from what they used in this movie. It is one of my favorite books of all time. Actually, I might leave from this recording early so I can go find it and thumb through it again.
I have a tidbit on the Smiths, actually.
Go for it.
That shot where you're coming down through Isengard and it zooms into the sword the orcs are forging the weapons.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the armorers actually forging one of those swords.
That is really funny.
I love that so much. It doesn't surprise me. So many people had to wear so many hats.
If you want to make it look accurate, get the actual blacksmith to be doing blacksmithing while you're shooting it.
Old Tony there, he's been a blacksmith for 30 years. And he's still wearing the orc mask. We can't get him off. He really likes it. The props people are pitching a fit, but none of us are going to tell him to take it off.
Yeah, the arms and armor look spectacular.
Yes.
But even Gandalf's pipe looks good and looks like it's meant to be there, like it's used. The Aragorn has a whetstone attached to his sheath. As a matter of fact, I do believe Viggo Mortensen requested it because, like, wait, if I'm out in the wild, I'd want to sharpen this. Give me a whetstone to sew onto this thing.
I think he requested the whetstone and also a small knife.
Yeah,
because he thought, I need a knife for while I'm out in the wild for bushcrafting.
and they're like,
they gave it to him because it makes sense. It's utterly believable. And side note, we probably couldn't count the times that the three of us have watched this film. I couldn't count how many times I've watched it in the last couple of weeks. I'm always finding something new. And this latest time I watched it for this podcast, I noticed that Gandalf's staff has a slot where he stores his pipe. Yeah, and I was watching this scene in Orthanc where he was talking to Saruman, and he gives the line, "Tell me, old friend, when did Saruman the Wise exchange reason for madness?" And I didn't hear a thing he said because his staff was right next to his head, and so was his pipe. I'm like, his pipe is in his staff. How have I not noticed this before?
It's these little details that somebody had to take time, budgeted time and resources to craft to make the world look lived in. And that's something that doesn't exist in that level of detail in any other film that I can think of. And not just for the close-up shots. Like, of course, that zoom in at the beginning of Sauron's hand and the ring looks exquisitely detailed. Like that's your poster shot. You're selling the movie on that. But everything looks that good, and you just don't see that in Hollywood or anywhere.
I remember in an interview from The Two Towers, Bernard Hill, who plays King Theoden, he was talking about the armor that the Smiths had made for his character and how on the interior of the armor was a layer of beautiful fabric, which, by the way, lining an interior of armor with fabric is very period.
Yep.
But the fabric had these, I don't know if they were printed or embroidered, but had a beautiful pattern of horse heads all across it. And he said, no one ever saw that. No one knew it was there, but they put it there. That was the level of attention and detail that these prop makers and smiths to make something so wonderful.
Yeah.
On the topic of things that I noticed for the first time in this viewing, I had never seen before that during Boromir's send-off, they put him in, laid him to rest in the boat and sent him down. And Aragorn is cinching up Boromir's vambraces to his own arms. Mm-hmm. It's like, never call attention to it. It's just, you know what? This is something that I'm going to use to remember this valiant man. It's like, I had never noticed it before. I'd never really even paid attention to Boromir's armor very much before until I saw that. I'm like, oh yeah, and it's got the tree and the stars on it that are Gondor's heraldry. Just never noticed.
I also wondered if there is a deleted scene where, as the three of them are standing over Boromir, and after Aragorn gets done crying, he stands up and they all three look down, and Aragorn says, "Dibs on the van braces."
Leave the bodies.
And Gimli's like, "Dibs on the shield." Puts it aside because it's too big for him. And
Legolas just wants his beef jerky.
Legolas wants nothing because he is an elf and he cares not for the things of men.
Oh, well, shall we talk about characters?
There's quite a few of them.
Yeah. Maybe we don't have to talk about all the characters. I mean, Fredegard Bolger, we don't need to talk about.
But I had 20 minutes to talk about Fredegard.
I mean, there's a lot to say about the dude. He stood up to he stood his ground, staying at the cabin when the Nazgul were coming, and he knew it. This dude saved the Fellowship, but cut him out of the movie. Apparently, Peter Jackson. Thank you. No, I'm not going to get mad about that.
Excuse me, I refuse to be a part of a podcast that so blatantly ignores Farmer Maggot.
Dude, he's told a Nazgul to shove off. I mean...
Yeah. Farmer Maggot, good family man, loves his wife, protects his mushrooms, loving dog owner, and is respected by Tom Bombadil. Takes nothing from a Nazgul, is rumored to know no fear.
I mean, that ain't nothing. I think that's one of the things that the book did to show that the hobbits really are hardier creatures than we give them credit for. I mean, that's part of one of the themes of the book and the film, is that there is something about these people that we can place, if there is any hope to be placed in this hopeless task. It is in one of these people.
You can learn all of their ways in a month, and after 100 years, they still surprise you.
I mean, even Lobelia Sackville Baggins smacked Saruman with her umbrella.
I love that.
Was it Saruman that she hit, or Wormtongue? I've forgotten.
One of the... I mean, regardless, she's punching above her weight.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I know we've got a lot of characters to cover, but there's one that I wanted to hone in on first, and that's Aragorn. Okay, fantastic in the film. This character has changed a lot in the adaptation. This whole plot about him comparing himself to Isildur and contemplating his own weaknesses and limitations, that's all movie, no book. But I think that one thing that makes it a strong presence is that they are themes that appeal to a 21st century audience in terms of evaluating what makes him a good leader. Watching him wrestle with these issues, when these issues of the strength of humankind and the strength of will are very present on film. Seeing him wrestle with this makes us trust him to be a good person when push comes to shove.
It also makes him very relatable. Yeah. I mean, here he is wrestling with the weight of his ancestry, the mistake that his family made once. The question is, will he make the same one? If he was presented with the question, what would you do with the ring? And that very question comes up later. And so it makes him human. Whereas in the book, the sword is reforged right from the get-go. And he's like, I am setting out to reclaim my throne and my people. And here you see a steady progression. Like when we're first introduced to him, he's not Aragorn yet. He's Strider. Yeah. And as this movie goes on in Two Towers, Return of the King, we see that steady progression from Ranger to King.
Yeah.
His function in Fellowship in the novel is different. Because we're getting this through the lens, through the entirety of Fellowship of the Ring. We're seeing the entire story through Frodo's lens. And Aragorn is this bigger than life, superheroic figure to the hobbits. And he doesn't become humanized until the beginning of the Two Towers when he realizes how badly he's failed, that the Fellowship is broken. I've lost Frodo. I can't get to Frodo. I've lost the other hobbits. And he's the weight of his inadequacy comes to him then much later. And he becomes human in the Two Towers when we no longer have to view him through the lens of the hobbits. So I think that it was a good choice in the movie because that particular archetype, that viewpoint, we don't have as much because we're actually outside of Frodo's perspective in the film because we're seeing it all from a more objective perspective. That was kind of extemporaneous. I hope it made sense.
No, it made sense to me. I also wanted to talk about another character that is
Before
really
we get off of Aragorn, I wanted to mention, because James has this comment about Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah. I cannot express how much it pleased me when I saw in the making of documentaries the lengths Viggo Mortensen went through to become Strider. This is a guy who he slept in his costume. He carried his sword with him everywhere he went, walking down the street, to the restaurant, to the dentist. He had it with him all the time. He had the cops called on him more than once, but he immersed himself into the character of Aragorn and Strider, whether it was riding a horse, learning sword fighting, how to survive in the wild. He did it all. And one thing that I loved about just the character of Viggo is that what he did in between shots, he went fishing. If they were out on location and they were near any body of water, he had his box and his fishing pole, and the second they said cut and he didn't think he was needed, he was gone.
There was something mentioned in the commentary, the crew commentary, that that bit where Lurtz pulls Aragorn's knife out of his leg and throws it at him.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So
Viggo
dangerous.
Mortensen said that was just his brainstorm at the moment. He says, no, pull that knife out and throw it at me and I'm going to deflect it. And he actually did that. He deflected it with the sword. And the crew said that, yeah. And then we went looking for the knife right after that and found it was actually sunk a couple inches into a tree. That might have killed him.
I, if I recall, I think that he told the actor playing Lurtz to do it, but they neglected to tell any of the crew.
Yeah, he didn't tell any of the crew about it.
So, originally it was supposed to, either drop it or kind of throw it in the direction of Viggo, but miss him. But he's like, no, man, throw it to me. I'll take care of it. And Viggo, who sword fighting master Bob Anderson quoted that one of the finest people he's ever taught was Viggo Mortensen. And Viggo just skillfully just deflected it right out of the air. Gosh, that was
But it really should have been a blunted dagger.
It really should have been.
No, this should have been a CG shot or a rubber dagger because, as soon as Viggo Mortensen walks onto a set, the insurance rates just skyrocket. Just his presence there.
I think they left the real dagger in the tree. Nope, you get a foam one from now on. We can't trust you.
Anything else that we want to say about Aragorn?
We could say so much, but let's move on.
Right. Okay. Another character that I wanted to say just a little bit about was Sauron, because I thought that it was such an interesting problem to have. That you have this character who sits behind 87 layers of fortifications in his land, miles and miles and miles away, and yet you have to make him feel like a threat here and now. And the choice that they made to make him just this huge eye is a departure from the book. The Eye of Sauron is mentioned in the books, but in the movie, he's unable to take physical form because he doesn't have the ring. In the books, he has physical form. It takes him a long time to regenerate, but he's able to build himself a new body. But you can't have this of yes, he's a horrible threat. Darth Vader is over there on the Death Star. You can't see him. He's never going to walk on. You never actually come face to face with him. But believe me, he's terrifying and he's over there. It just doesn't work. But they found a way to show and don't tell. And so I thought it was a really creative choice for Jackson to describe him as a bodiless entity who needs the ring, and it provides something concrete for the audience to focus on, and drives the importance of the ring for the enemy. A departure, but one that I think works exceptionally well on screen.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes him far more menacing than the physically embodied Sauron that we saw in the prologue.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, he was powerful and he was threatening, but he's still a guy that's just effectively a tank. The bodiless, the giant eye at the top of Barad-dûr is far scarier to me.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the acres of characters that we have to choose from, does anybody have anything that stands out to them?
We could talk so much about the hobbits. I mean, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. I think we'd be best served if we just spoke about them as a whole.
I'm sorry, I can't. Let's talk about the hobbits as a whole that you just throw food into, because you're never going to fill that up.
You're not wrong. I mean, these four gentlemen did such a great job of portraying these little 3.5-foot people and their love of food and of drink. I mean, from mushrooms to, it also brings home that they're supposed to be hiding and traveling in secret, and yet the second Aragorn leaves their side, 3 of them are cooking up a platter of tomatoes, sausages, and nice crispy bacon. They played their characters so believable.
Yeah, Merry and Pippin, I'm of two minds on them, because in the books they were far more aware of how serious things were.
Yes.
Pippin was still a little foolish, but they participated in the whole Crick Hollow deception, knowing what was going on, although they didn't tell Frodo that they knew what was going on. But the movie version of them, they're off on a fun adventure and they don't really grasp the seriousness of everything. Yeah. The entirety of the first movie up until Gandalf's death, I think.
I would have been happier if we had got a bit more of the situationally awakened versions from the book, who knew a bit about the seriousness of the situation. And if I even believe that it was Merry in the book who figured out the whole riddle to get through the door of Moria.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Speak friend, and what's the Elvish word for friend? I think in a commentary he was ticked off that they gave Elijah the line. But I can also see the decision to bring these two along as being somewhat kind of clueless and hapless, especially in the character of Pippin, the fool of a Took, because it frankly plays for some good laughs, and also it creates good character moments in later films when the seriousness of their situation is thrust upon them.
Yeah, the film kind of struggles with what to do when you don't have a comic relief, and especially having Pippin as the comic relief works very well. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why some of the Tolkien purists were frustrated is that Gimli becomes the comic relief in the Two Towers, which
I did not enjoy.
That's a real take. I'm not gonna tell you not to feel that way. And these two characters do get, especially Merry and Pippin, do get their character moments in the Two Towers and Return of the King. I mean, not as much as they do in the books, but they at least get their development and their int juice.
I feel like two of the standouts that we could discuss are Gandalf and Arwen. I mean, Gandalf we could just spend an hour discussing, but I think we should take some time discussing Arwen, especially considering her presence in the book versus her presence in the film.
I mean, she steps on stage in the book.
Yeah, she's in the council, but I think just through Frodo's viewpoint of saying, oh, hey, here's this woman who looks an awful lot like Elrond. I wonder who she is. And then he sees her a little later talking to Aragorn, but she doesn't have any lines.
Thus did Frodo beheld Arwen Undomiel, Daughter of Elrond, half elven.
I mean,
And
Something like that.
and she has a great chase scene with the Nazgul. I do like, I mean, because in the book, that was just Frodo on the horse alone. And
no, that was
Glorfindel,
Glorfindel
yeah.
with him.
I thought that
And I miss Glorfindel, but I think it was a good move to combine those characters.
yeah. And
Agreed.
also, they gave her the Elvish lines, which actually translate. I looked it up loosely to "Hi ho, silver, away." I think that there was one thing in the movie that she lacks, which she really did have in the book: standards. Yeah, I mean, Aragorn carried it into battle. She never had it anywhere, any of the movies. It's a real loss.
I'm out. I'm
Yep.
done. I can't
Yep.
after that. We're done. That's
I
it.
just ruined the podcast.
That's
People-
not just it for this episode. We're shutting down the podcast.
People
No
are
more.
down. People are deleting all of the episodes they had downloaded. They're erasing
this
their
is why I
internet
split
history.
off the actual plays into their own feeds because I knew this was coming.
We didn't think he would do it, Brian, but we were all of us deceived. Well, real quickly, what could we say about Gandalf?
I feel like
Ian McKellen is incredible.
right.
Yes.
What you get on the page, I feel like you got on the screen.
Yeah. His delivery of the history of the ring. By the way, that whole scene between him and Frodo in the kitchen of all places. One, beautifully shot, and another example of that whole forced perspective, which was, I mean, at the time of watching it, it was flawless. And the fact that, he talks about the fires of Mount Doom and the horrors of Sauron, and then the shot goes to the ring sitting there on the table. You see like part of a napkin, a breadcrumb. It just seems so mundane in its setting, and yet it's this horrible weapon. This scene, it's so exposition heavy, but it never feels like it because of his delivery.
Well, also they made some extremely prudent cuts because there's like 9 pages. I counted 9 pages that were summed up in one other knew that Bilbo had the ring. I don't know how long they tortured him, but amongst the cries and inane babble, they discerned 2 words: Shire, Baggins. That was 9 pages condensed, and I think pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, it takes...
And yet we're going to get an entire movie about it next year sometime.
Yeah. I mean, remember, it takes Tolkien at least 4 pages to begin talking about trees. So the callbacks to the history of the ring and the history of the ring with Bilbo are so expertly put in. And this was another scene that was shot beautifully, when Bilbo leaves and Gandalf is sitting in front of the fire. He's going chewing on his pipe. Riddles in the dark.
Muttering to himself.
My precious. Yeah, I'm so happy that line was there. Riddles in the dark. And you see out of focus, which I thought was the perfect decision, Frodo coming in and picking up the ring for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It told so much with only hints, but it conveyed enough information so that when he did talk about it at the later scene, it all made perfect sense.
Well, and I don't know of any other of any higher compliment that I can give to somebody's performance, but now when I read The Lord of the Rings again, I hear Ian McKellen's voice in lines that he never spoke.
I hear his voice. I see him as the character. Whatever happens in the future of Lord of the Rings, I mean, there's always talk, and it's all just talk about like another adaptation. Will they make it into a series, a cartoon, a video, whatever? If Hollywood has taught us one thing, is that as the years go by, there will be another adaptation. I mean, Spider-Man has proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt. But most people for Lord of the Rings are like Boromir. Lord of the Rings needs no second adaptation. I think forever in the minds of people, Ian McKellen is Gandalf. The two have become inseparable.
And Magneto.
And Magneto, yes.
Well, is there anything else that we can say about this beloved movie?
Anything we can say, absolutely. But we don't want this podcast to be as long as the extended edition of the movie. So,
yeah. Then there'll be a series of discs about the making of this podcast, in which you get with the extended version of the episode.
The podcast has already been canceled.
That's true. That's true. Sorry, everyone. Yeah. I think that'll do it. I think I'm going to go read the book again.
You just finished. I mean, I'm not going to dissuade you, but,
Yeah, what's your point?
Yeah, okay, fair. Yeah.
I think that will wrap it up for this movie. So let us head to the orc apocalypse. I'm sorry, wrong movie. Zombie apocalypse plan of the week. Mike, how are we holding off the forces of darkness this time?
Okay. The way that we are holding off the undead is we're going to walk right on up to them and we're going to tell them, remember the promise that you made? Well, it's time to fulfill that promise. And we're going to take them to the path of the dead. And then we're going to use those to attack the Corsairs. And then once we get the Corsairs taken care of, we're going to load up all of our buddies. And then we're going to sail right on down to the fields of Pelennor, which will give us just enough time to go ahead and wipe out the rear guard. And so then we can just regroup and then, wait a minute, I think somebody already wrote this book.
But Mike, they will not suffer the living.
with my puns, that's it. No one can suffer what I have to throw out anyway.
Oh, we suffer. We suffer.
And on that note, that's going to wrap it up for us this episode. Thank you all for listening. Please check us out online at all the usual places at geekatarms.com, at facebook.com/geekatarms. Mike, where else are we?
We are Arms Geek on what's left of Twitter, and we are Geek at Arms on Instagram and Blue Sky.
Please leave us a like and leave us a review. And as always, from Bryan, Mike, and James, be safe, be blessed, and be geeky.
Thanks for listening to Geek at Arms. Music for this podcast was provided by Incompetech.com. For more, check us out at Facebook.com/Geek at Arms. Give us a like and maybe even subscribe to us on iTunes. That would be awesome.